Want to learn 2 simple techniques that will transform your watercolor washes? In this video, I'll cover how improper dilution of your paint can ruin watercolor washes, how to do them correctly so that you can go from washes like this to this, and eventually paintings like this. Watercolor washes. They're used in skies, backgrounds, still water, and buildings and streets. Coming up are the techniques to learn and practice, the mistakes you're probably making, and simple solutions to fix them. Here are the supplies for today's video. I've cut a sheet out of this Arches watercolor pad that I covered in my last video on the supplies you need as a beginning watercolor artist. This is the 9x12, and I simply cut it into 4 sections. Technique number 1 is how to do a flat wash from watercolor paint straight out of the tube. Which leads me to mistake number 1, which is not using enough water. With oils and acrylics, we load our brush heavy with paint. Not so in watercolor. So I'm going to put some pigment on my palette. If you've had an experience with, say, oils or acrylics, you'll have a tendency to load your dry brush with watercolor pigment that has come out of the tube directly. And let me show you what this does. There are times that you will want to do this, but it's rare. So I'm going to put my paint onto the paper, and you'll see that right away it doesn't blend. It is skimming across the top of the surface of the paper, the hills and valleys that I've talked about in other videos. And right out of the gate, a lot of students become really frustrated because it doesn't look anything like what they think watercolor should look like, and they're right. They're right. So the trick is to properly dilute. I am going to wet my brush. I already have paint on it, so we'll see how that goes. So let's see. That's not bad. Now I know what I'm looking for. Some artists will refer to Joseph Zabukvich's watercolor clock, where you're very dilute. It's so dilute it's even lighter than tea or like tea. It goes tea, and then coffee, then milk, then cream, and then directly out of the tube he calls butter, which is pretty accurate. For what we're doing today, I would say mix it up like so you have a nice puddle and that it's saturating your brush. Now, I will talk about small brushes and how beginning watercolor artists like to go for those, and it's not necessarily a problem, but you can't paint a large painting with just this little tiny brush. But for this exercise, this will be fine. So I've loaded my brush, and now if I've done it right, it should go across the paper and fill in everything. And it didn't quite. Did you notice that? It didn't quite do that. So I'm going to add a little more water, and let's see what it does now. There we go. There we go. That's what you're looking for. And so what you can do is you can practice. You can do little shapes, like I'm going to do a little square here, and just fill it in. And try to do a little circle. And fill it in and just leave it. Don't touch it. And when we talk about the moisture on the paper, and this was wet on dry, so that we're not covering that. This is just wet on dry. If you can get this, that's a really good first step. Let's try another color. This is cadmium red scarlet hue, kind of a long name. I haven't used this one in a while, so it might blob on me. Let's see. No, well, no, it did a little bit. Okay. Try again. This is kind of a warm red. So same thing, I'm not using any, well, my brush is a little bit damp. I'm not using any water in my brush, so it's pretty buttery. There are situations, as I said, that you can use with this, but that's not what you want to learn at the beginning. So that's still pretty thick. I'm trying to get it where it's a nice little puddle. Let's see, how does that look? Okay, that looks good. So here's a fun thing you can do. Taking the blue, with this little brush, you can get some nice effects. So I'm just going to paint a little vine. I'm just going to pretend that it's some kind of a plant that has blue branches. How about that? Blue branches. We're in blue world now. And using your diluted red, you can put little berries on it. So at the very beginning of your watercolor journey, you can make some nice designs. And don't think about 3D stuff. I do a lot of 3D work, and if you've looked at my work at all, you know what I'm talking about. So just concentrate on making flat 2D shapes. So like I did a flat circle in blue, here's a flat circle in red. And whatever colors you've bought, you can use those and try that out. So that addresses when you have paint on your brush that's too thick. Using the Nic Pro brush, this is a size 9, I'm going to dilute my blue a lot. Because that's what my teacher said, dilute it a lot. You don't want it coming real thick out of the tube, right? I'm going to dilute it a lot. Okay. So you can see it somewhat, yeah, a little bit, but it's really, really light. And then if you were to say, oh, I want to try to put some clouds in, you know, leave a little bit of white. And this is another common mistake that beginning watercolor artists make. Okay, the paper has dried, and you can see that the pigment is very, very light. And so there's hardly any contrast between the clouds and the sky. You kind of can't tell what's going on. So that's mistake number 2. Okay, so the solution, as I'm sure you've figured out, is fairly simple, and that is simply to make your pigment darker. Now, the reason I showed this example was because if I had made the pigment very light, but I didn't have something in it, such as a cloud or some other object, to give you some context, it wouldn't necessarily have made sense as to why such a light wash doesn't make sense. There could be reasons to have a very light wash somewhere, such as if you're painting a gem and you have many planes and you're going to have a lot of different values in that gem. But in the kinds of paintings that I tend to do with a lot of landscapes, it would make sense to help you understand that kind of context, because most people want to paint landscapes. All right, so I'm mixing up the paint, and it's going to be fairly dark. So I'm going to lighten it up because I'm going to pretend I'm going to do a sky. Actually, I'm going to use this section right here just because it's here and it's available to use. We can see how much we can dilute our paint and still get a good value. I'm not going to put clouds in it because this is just a little demo so you can see the difference in values. So what I wanted to show you this for was so you can see the contrast in color. It almost looks like a little ocean, doesn't it? I'm able to go back because it's still wet. Trying to do a flat wash, so that's why I want the pigment to be even. It's fairly wet, so it should even out. and we'll let that dry. Okay, our sample has dried, and you can see that it's a much darker value than I had before, and you easily can tell the difference by looking at how there's a good contrast between the wash and even just the white paper. So that's the fix for a wash that's too light. So here's a palette. The blue that I was using, as I said, was ultramarine. It's actually French ultramarine. So I'm just going to put the water on it directly. And that will get pretty wet within, 30 seconds to 2 minutes. So now I've re-wet the pigment, and you can see the water in the well. I'm going to attempt to do thick paint with re-wet paint, which is a little hard to do. So let's see if I can do it. My brush is wet. I'm going to, even though I've got water at the edge, I'm going to try to just use the top of the mound of paint and see what happens. So that's not bad. This is one reason why I like to have my students start with dried paint, because it's much easier to avoid the thick paint problem coming straight out of the tube. It's still a little dry brush technique that I'm not real crazy about, so you can dip directly into the well where the water is. The colored water, painting with colored water. See how smooth that is? That's pretty nice. That's pretty nice. Let's try the same thing with the red. Try to make it thick. Let's see if I did it. No, I think my brush is really wet. I mean, this is good. I'm trying to make a mistake. I'm trying to do it wrong so you can learn from the mistakes that can happen. So try again. Okay, I did it. That's what you're trying to avoid. There's not as much of this paint in the well, so there's a fair amount of diluted paint that you can work with. And that's pretty good. It's a little thick. It's a little thick. And of course, you can always mix it. So let's say it's a little thick. Come over to the well, and then I'll take the dirty water. Here's how I'm testing. And that's not bad. So I'm happy with that. This puddle is good. Yeah, so that works out pretty well. So you see, if you re-wet your two paints that have dried, you can get to a good dilution a little bit more quickly. You will have to work harder to get a very deep value with dried paints, and you'll want to play with that. So what now? I've shown you some techniques, I've shown you some little shapes, some little designs you can try, but how do you start taking it to the next level? What I've done here is I have taken one of those sheets of paper and I've drawn it in uneven grids so that you can get different sizes to practice these plain washes on. And so you can work from small to large and get some practice scaling up. Now, this is still pretty small. I'll just do a couple of them. Since I have the red mixed up in a nice puddle, I'll go ahead and use that. I did dip my brush because I'm going to dilute it a little bit more. So here's a small one, and you want to just work directly in the square and not go back over it. I will try to mess one up so you can see what happens. So it's not even, what I mean to say, the edges are not even. I've missed some spots, but don't worry about it. I'm going to skip to a different square. First of all, I'm going to make sure I have enough pigment. And if something I am not consistent about is having enough pigment, that's it. All right, I'm going to go to this middle square. And I'm going to brush it in. You can see I'm just going back and forth, kind of like mowing the lawn. And I got into the other square, but that's okay. Now I'm going to put my brush down and I'm going to look and see what kind of sheen it has. And it's actually already starting to dry. It's been very dry here. And so that's good. And I'm going to give it just a couple more seconds. And I'm going to go back. Let's see if I can make it go wrong. All right, I think so. Okay, do you see that? See how these edges are rough, and it will dry that way. So the lesson here is put your wash down and leave it. All right, well that is drying. I'm going to see if I can do it another way that can be problematic. Using this square, I'm going to go around it in an outline. And let's see what happens. You see the edges in that? It's because I put that outline and then I filled it in. So the lesson is you want to make it like this square where you're just going back and forth until you're done. So let's take on the challenge of the biggest square on this piece of paper. I will need more pigment for that. I'm just going to work left to right. And I'm running out of pigment. This is a common problem. What do? My moisture level is less here than it is here. So I need to work quickly, and see, I'm running into problems, which this is all part of the problem solving process that you run into in watercolor. Hopefully that's working, except you can see already there is some unevenness. Now I'm going to do a wash on the entire side of one of these pieces of paper. I'm going to use a larger brush. Now we have to be careful that we've got this color in our well mixed thoroughly, because if it has any kind of sediment in the pigment, it will settle and you can get uneven washes if you're not careful. So that is pretty well loaded. And here I'm going to get started. And I'm going to try to work from left to right. And unlike acrylic and oils, it's important to keep your brush loaded the entire time and not let it get, as they say, starved. Now the brush is getting a little too dry, so I probably waited too long there. So I'm going to keep loading the brush. Sometimes it's hard to paint and talk at the same time. I don't mind if people talk to me when I paint. I can have conversations with people, and usually I can find some place to stop if I need to. All right, so this is starting to dry. I'm going to go over this up here because I want the entire shape to be wet, and because we're looking for it to have a nice sheen. All right, let me try to get more paint in. Need to work a little quickly because it's starting to dry. If it's not all the way dry, you can go over the entire shape and you won't have any problems. But that's what we're going for, is to fill it in completely with pigment in one direction as much as possible, and then make sure that it's entirely wet, has a sheen over the entire thing. And it looks like I'm going to get some streaks. I don't think so. And because it's wet, I can correct those edges and make them straight. If I really care. I guess I do. I'm a recovering perfectionist. How many of you out there are recovering perfectionists? All right, so that's pretty wet. It looks evenly wet. Set my brush down. Well, that's going to roll into the lid. Okay. And I don't know if you can see the sheen on this. I'm going to try to tilt it different ways. I think that you can see that because that's what you want. So that should dry evenly, and that's the trick. Get it wet all over evenly and then let it dry. Don't go back and touch it if it starts to dry. You can touch it now. This is starting to dry here, right there. I can see it. I would have to cover the entire thing again if I wanted to go back, but I'm not going to do that because I don't need to. Now, while it's drying, what I want to explain is that if you were doing a painting, say, of a village, you would probably use more than one color in your wash. I wanted you to concentrate on one pigment today so that you can get used to the technique. But as I said, in actuality, you would use more than one pigment in an actual painting. Let's review. Do your wash in one go. Don't go back. Don't outline. And sometimes even a fairly decent wash can have some variation. And finally, practice, 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 scaling up. Go for the glisten. Now that you know how to dilute your watercolors properly and paint a flat wash, I hope you're eager to paint shapes on your own. These techniques will get you ready for my next video on the secret to great watercolors.